Okay, so I think it's live. So I'll show you where you can go on YouTube. Have you guys been to my YouTube channel at all? Especially for the Photoshop tutorials? Do they have all those Photoshop tutorials? For you guys to check out? So if you go to I just wanted to see this as an experiment. I actually got this message from the dean about the coronavirus and how they're going to start trying to, as part of the Flex Day coming up, have more focus on online learning, and potentially, based on what happens, you know, there could be days where campus is shut down. Hopefully that's not the case, but as a precaution and to ensure that nobody has any lapse in their education, doing more of these online type things are going to be helpful. So I think this is a good training opportunity for me at least. See how we can do this. But I want to show you where you can find it on YouTube. Just got to sign in real quick here. Okay, so if you just go to my YouTube page, you'll see right on the main page itself here it is right here. So let's see now. So there's like a slight delay, but now if you right, there's like a slight delay with this, but you'll see me show up. So there's like a slight delay. Oh my god. There's going to be feedback. And it's showing you the inception, right? So now you have class, but there's like a slight delay. So there's like a slight delay. So we're going to have to fix that. So the way to fix that is just to turn the volume down. And it's showing you the inception. All right?
So we're going to have to fix that. So the way to fix that.
Okay, so that's fixed. All right, so let's go back. Let's do a couple things. So I'm just going to switch my location. So now I'm going to be up here. But this does two things, which is really nice. The one thing that it will do, it will let us record it, record the class. So if you need to refer back to something, you just go to this YouTube link, and you do this. Actually, there. And then the other thing we basically let you do is, if for any reason you can't show up, or if there is an issue with the coronavirus or something where you can't be here, you can still attend the class. So you can attend it live, and you can also, if you can't even attend it live, you can check it out after, or whenever you want. So, okay, I'm just kind of repositioning myself. And if you want to send me messages, you can do the chat. So there's chat here. And one last thing I want to do is turn on my adapter. I'm plugging my adapter, so. Get resituated, and when you do this type of stuff, you have to have some sort of welcome page for the broadcast, because sometimes you don't start broadcasting right away, so we have to welcome to DNA 50 week 3. And the thing about this week, the focus is style versus content, and it's an intro to cascading style sheets. So welcome to Great, so I want to go over some basic web styles and talk about type dominant versus image dominant websites. And then we'll do more with the CSS. We'll do more with cascading style sheets. So is everybody comfortable with what we were doing before lunch? It takes time to get used to the structure of creating the selector and then the property. But once you do that, it'll really become secondhand nature to understand how you use the style sheets to help you design the actual web page. So one of the things I want to talk about is how to bring images in using CSS. So let me switch over.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
So I'm going to open brackets on this computer too. Brackets.
This was, I think it had 9.
So I'm just going to go ahead and create a new index.html file. So I'll show you two things. First, I'll show you how CSS handles images, and then I'll show you how CSS handles fonts using Google Fonts. And this assignment for the mundane moment is going to require you that you do a little bit of both. Use Google Fonts and use your CSS to bring in the images using a background property. So I'm just going to save this as index.html. I'm going to create a new folder, and I'll call this assignment 3, since I'm demoing what we want to do for assignment 3. So index.html is the name of the file. Now for assignment 3, this is the standard procedure that we'll do every time we create a web page. I'm going to add a folder called images, and then I'm going to find something. Okay, so I have some images on my desktop, so I'm just going to pull some of these images into that images folder. And this is what we'll work with. So I got a couple screenshots. The only thing I want to do with these screenshots is I want to make sure that I'm using proper naming conventions. So there's spaces, and these are PNG files by default because when you do a screenshot on a Mac, it's going to give you a PNG. But I just want to make sure that these are properly named. So here's a screenshot of some auto parts, and this is a screenshot of some keto recipes. So I just happen to have these on my laptop. So I'm going to make sure I name these properly. So this is going to be, these are starters. Those are starters, and these are, I'll just call this one recipes. So recipes. And I'll make sure that they're in my images folder. And now I'm going to go back to that index.html, and I'm just going to create my basic boilerplate. So everybody should know this, right? At this point, like I'm doing it multiple times. So first I create my HTML tag, then I create my head tag, and then I'll create a body tag, which is this body tag and the head tag are next to each other. So what do we call that when you have two tags next to each other? You're thinking about the hierarchy of the structure of the tags. So these are siblings. So you can say these are like siblings. And then the parent to the siblings is the HTML tag. It's just like the same way with the folder structure. You have a parent, the images folder is the child, and the parent is the assignment 3 folder. So that same way of thinking about it applies to the actual HTML as well. And now my head tag, I'm going to create, what tag do you use for the internal style sheet? Style, right, so we'll have a style tag. Also create a title tag as well. Call it assignment 3. And now my body, I'm going to create a div tag. So div is basically a pretty broad type of tag, which you would use it for something that you don't really know specifically, that's not, something that's not covered by another tag, basically. So div tag is stands for divider. So let's say I just want to create some sort of image on the page. I'll use this div tag. And then I'll actually create a class for this image. So we'll just call it background. So if I create this class with the period, dot background, and I want to apply it to div, I have to use the attribute here called class, and that's going to equal the name that I chose, which is whatever I want to make that class. That name doesn't matter, so it's going to be, I'm calling it background, you can call it whatever you want. Now the first thing we need to do is create some properties for this style that we're establishing for this background class. So I'm going to give this a width. So I'll say, make it 1200 pixels and a height. And I'll make it 1200 pixels as well. And now for the background image, I'm going to choose background. Image. And the next thing you do after you type in background image, you want to type in URL. And then inside the parentheses, that's where you choose your image. So it's different than using the image tag. So here inside the parentheses, once you type those, it's kind of like how when you type quotes for the image tag, the images will start to appear. They're in the proper folder. So I can go into images, and then I'll pick recipes. And I've seen it actually where you've had quotes here as well, but it shouldn't be necessary. Now, once I save this, make this bigger. And that's basically what you want to do for your images. So the images now are going inside this background image property, and you can apply that to any tag. So it doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be a div tag. This could be a p tag. And you'll see it works the same exact way. So it doesn't really matter. So instead of going into the actual body tag, what we were doing previously with those banners is we were creating an image tag here, and then you had this SRC, which stands for source. So that's the attribute for that IMG image tag. And in quotes, we were selecting that image. So I'll put the starters down here. So there's the starters. So really you can do it both ways. You can use an image tag to bring in an image, or you can use this background image property for the style that you create. But it's probably better to stick with CSS for the images, because at least this way you can do more. You can modify it in different ways, change position, do all sorts of things. So that's bringing in your image. That's how you probably want to approach it for this assignment, assignment 3. Use that particular tag. Now let me show you how to bring in a font that you may want to use. So for the type dominant version of this web page, we can use Google Fonts. Let me see if I can. So just go to Google Fonts. It's fonts.google.com. And basically you pick a
broad type of tag, which you would use it for something that you don't really, that's not, something that's not covered by another tag, basically. So div tag stands for divider. So let's say I just want to create some sort of image on the page. I'll use this div tag. And then I'll actually create a class for this image. So let's call it background. So if I create this class with period, dot background, and I want to apply it to the div,
And I'll give you the code.
use
As you
the
work on this,
kind
I'll
of
give you all
your
the code.
class, and that's going to equal the name that I chose,
Yes.
which is whatever I want to make that class. That name doesn't matter. So I'm calling it background. You call it whatever you want. Now, the first thing you need to do is create some properties for this style that we're establishing for this background class. So I'm going to give this a width.
Here,
So I'll say make it 1200.
you forgot to close
pixels
this image.
and a height,
Yeah, you look for your red text and then save it.
and I'll make it 1200 pixels as well.
It
And now for the background,
as long as it's in the body tag.
background.
But here too is like this, where it says images, it has to be something in there.
Image. And the next thing you do after you type in the background
And
image,
here it looks like
you want to type in URL,
it's not
and then
set up
inside-
correctly. So if I go to the desktop
the
and
parentheses.
go to
That's where you choose your image. So it's different than using the image
oh,
tag.
see the name that you want to use
So here
is
inside the parentheses,
you have a 3 at the end of it.
once you type those,
So
it's kind of like
you don't want to have a 3
how
at the
when you
end
type
of it.
quotes for the image tag,
And let's see what else.
the
then your-
images will start to appear.
Okay, and then it's called index
So I
two.
put
Well,
images,
just call it
and
index.
then I'll pick
And it should be
recipes.
HTML. You have HTML.
And I've seen it actually
So I can-
where you had the quotes here
Yeah.
as well, but
So now, yes.
it shouldn't be necessary.
So
Now,
now when I go back to
if I
the
save this,
also, when you save it, you might want to save it again and go back into that folder. So it's in this download folder right now. Save it here. Then replace it. Now it's in the correct location. So when I hover over it, I actually see that. And then you want to make sure that in image source, images
and that's basically
/
what you want to do for your images. So
recipe.
the images now are going inside this
Okay.
background image property, and you can apply that to any tag. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be a div tag. This could be a p tag.
Here, HTML. We have HTML. All right, so I'm going to switch back now to the computer back here. I want to go over, so for the images that you'll use that background image property. Now I want to talk about fonts in more detail. just gotta test this out. All right. All right, so for fonts, here are the other font properties you'll want to know as you figure out how you want to design this one particular page for the one day moment, the type focus page. But first off, just the differences between serif and sans-serif. So the sans-serif font is basically without the ornamentation that you see in the F in the middle. The F in the middle, when the letter form ends at a particular point, call that the terminal, like the bottom of the F here is the terminal. Well, on a serif font, your terminals have these bracketed type of extensions coming out. And so that is a serif. So different types of fonts convey different feeling. Serif fonts were some of the very first fonts to be developed. And part of the process of creating the font using the metal letterpress type machine that actually was the printing part of the printing process, it had these little ends because it was like remnants of the metal as the font, the characters were developed. But that became a design feature that existed going forward. A lot of the sans-serif fonts were developed probably in the early 40s and 50s, and a lot of it had to do with the technology changing, and it's also a reflection of a modern style. So if you're working on something that has a more modern feel to it, a sans-serif font works. If you're working on something that has a more elegant, maybe historical type feel to it, something that's more formal, serif fonts are usually ways to go. But there's all sorts of ways to think about this. It's just thinking about what the font and the look of the type conveys to the viewer. And that's sometimes going with your intuition as well. So when you think about your assignment, think about what font you want to choose and what feels right. If you have this moment that seems like it's poetic and like the flower, maybe even like a script-based font, it's something that you want to do for that. But if you have something that is more kind of like has something that needs impact, maybe a sans-serif, like a bold sans-serif typeface. So think about the typefaces. With CSS, we have font families. So you have this generic family. So those generic families are going to have names which cover a broad spectrum of fonts. And usually when you have this generic name, like serif or monospace, it's picking that default font that your web browser is using on your particular computer at the time. So, if the default font is Arial, that's going to be the serif font that's chosen. If your default monospace font is Courier, then Courier will be the font if you have your font family set to serif or monospace. Then you have specific font families. So in that font tag that we just used, you can declare a specific font family, like Times Roman or Arial. If you have a design that requires a very specific look, then you would pick this specific font. The challenge is, though, if that computer does not have that font that you want, then it's going to default to either the font that's the browser is using for HTML, or if you have a list of fonts, your default font will come after the comma. So you have a comma after Times Roman, and you may have sans-serif or serif after that, and it will default to a default font, and it will be whatever is the font that's being determined by the browser. So just serif fonts, Times Roman, Georgia, Garamond. You can go into Illustrator or Photoshop and just kind of look at the fonts. The font menu kind of shows you that font now. And depending on the resolution of the screen, you can kind of see what your serif or sans-serif fonts are. You know, Arial, sans-serif, Baskerville, serif. And you can actually, if you want to, you know, with this text here, as you're picking fonts, you know, you can kind of just sample them like this. One nice feature of Illustrator or Photoshop, if you have the character type window open, you go to Window, you go to Type, you pick Character, and you scroll through the list here, it automatically updates the font on your screen as you're scrolling. So you can investigate these different looks and feels and kind of figure out which font is right for that particular web page that you're creating. This is where you want to do research as well. So it's the same idea as before, you know, when we were talking about the mood boards. You know, spend some time and do searches. You know, what are fonts? What would be a great font for a flower shop? What would be a great font for, you know, a pet store? Or what's a great font for a particular, you know, horror movie, right? You want to do some research and find those fonts. And then you'll have to do more research and find the equivalent web font. So if you do like, let's say, you know, Century School Book, what I would tend to do is do a search for Google font version of Century School Book. And then here, you kind of have to look at it and see what you come up with. So here's a font called Domine. You know, do like a one-by-one comparison. The challenge with, you know, here's a D for Century School Book, here's the D for Domine. You know, they look pretty close. The challenge with fonts is that most fonts are licensed. So a font like New Century School Book is going to have a license, and you could use probably the font equivalent of New Century School Book. You'd have to probably go through Typekit to see if they have it. If Adobe doesn't have that font, then you'd have to find a font foundry, and then go through the font foundry. So just do a search for font foundries. You know, Fontsmith here, and then find that font that you're looking for. But most likely you'll have to pay for it. And that's why you're not going to find it with the Google fonts, because the Google fonts are free. So the licensing is different. Hold on one second. I want to... But you know, you're looking for fonts that feel right, that reflect the job that you're doing, you know, that makes sense for the project. And just excuse me for 1 second. I'm going to share this broadcast with some of the students who aren't here today. So you could do that right now. I mean, go into Illustrator and explore some of the fonts, and then see if you can find the equivalent font with Google Fonts. And you know, think about the look and feel and the message you're conveying. You could even do research on the history of the font. And the history of the font should give you an indication of what its purpose should be. You know, if the font was developed in the 1800s, then probably it's not the best font for a techno event, and vice versa. You know, fonts that were developed in like the late 90s probably won't be the best font for, you know, a wedding invitation. But it just depends on how that font feels for the message that you're trying to convey to your audience. So So I'm just going to send out a quick email blast.
You have to, well, this is all right. You have to make
Okay, so, gotta save it. So everybody's gonna get a little message from me. Okay, so, just thinking about this, the purpose of the font, the style, how it relates to the message is important. Sans-Serif fonts include Arial, sans, fonts do not have the braces at the ends of the characters. So Helvetica, Gil Sans. Can anybody name some sans-serif fonts?
Century Gothic.
Yeah, Century Gothic, Futura, Avant-Garde, which one? Avenir? Yeah, A-V-E-N-I-R. Yeah, Impact. This is a popular one. So yeah, just a few. So the monospace fonts, they're your like typewriter fonts. So the font that we use, associated with like coding or even sometimes like a screenplay, Courier, is your monospace font. So the font family property lets you use this fallback system. So you declare your main font name that you want. So it's up here. So you use the font family property, and the value for that property, for that style, is going to be the font that you want. Now in quotes, you'd say Times New Roman. You're using quotes because there's spaces there, and you want to ensure that the name matches. But the way it works is, if Times New Roman is not on that computer, then your fallback font is going to be Times. And then if they don't even have Times, your fallback font will be whatever serif font they have in their computer. So that might be like Geneva or something, one of the default fonts that comes with the operating system. So those are your fallbacks. So the reason that you want a fallback is that if you do have a design that you want to ensure that the integrity of the design stays intact, that fallback font is going to at least give you a font that looks similar, or hopefully similar. Because from a graphic design standpoint, you want to ensure that that design message is always clear. So if you have like something that's supposed to be for a upscale event, let's say, and you are using a script-based font, then you want to probably have it default to a serif font. So it's good to have those fallbacks. Those those are helpful. And that's the way that naming convention is set up. Font style. So you can use this to specify italic and oblique. Now, italic is different than oblique. So italic fonts are designed specifically to have a certain look and feel to them. So some people think that italic is just taking that font and slanting it. And that's what some software programs do, but italic fonts are designed in a very specific way. Oblique is what some people think italic is, where you just take the font and you give it you skew it somehow. So, for example, in Adobe Illustrator, the italic version of Century Schoolbook is that. And it's not the same as just skewing it. So if I took the D, and I made it just bold like this, and I went and this is what some programs will actually do. So if I use, let's see, shear is the way you like skew something. So some programs will do this. And the differences are subtle, but the two aren't the same. So you know, there's design differences. You could probably see it in some other circumstances with, let's say, get something else here. So I'll pick Garamond. Then I'll drag this out and show you the italic version. So this is the true italic version right here. Now if you see the skewed version of that, this would be the oblique version. And you can kind of see how, I probably don't have the exact angle as what it should be, but you can see the differences. The actual design difference in the italic version, it's much nicer. It reads much nicer than just simply skewing the font and creating this fake italic version. So always try to use the true italics. If you use italics, I would stay away from doing the oblique, just because the look is not as nice as a true italic. There's all these design considerations to make that A look as pleasing as possible versus the oblique version. So you can, for size, you have this idea of absolute size. There's absolute size, which you're going to specify, okay, I want it to be 20 points. That's it. I don't want it to be any bigger or smaller. It does not allow a user to change text size. And it's useful when you know you're going to be maybe outputting something at a certain size, or maybe it's for just aesthetic reasons. But for accessibility purposes, you want that font to become bigger or smaller based on the user's needs. Relative size is basically the size that's relative to the other sizes that you're using on the web page, and allows the user to change that text size if they need to. So to create a relative size, you can use this designation. So M basically is equal to, 1M is like the default size of the font. But if you calculate that as one font, 1M equals 16 pixels. But if you use, let's say you use 2 M's, that's equal to twice the size, but it relates to the default size that's set in the browser. So if a user of that browser has the default font size set to 10, then 2 M's would make that font 20 pixels. So it's relative based on what the user has set. You can also use a percentage. So if you give that font size like 100% percentage, it's going to stay at that whatever size was determined by the user, 16 pixels. 50% would be 8 points or 8 pixels. You can use a combination on your web page as well of M's and percentages. Font weight is making the font bold. So normal is the default. If you don't want to change that, you don't even have to include it. But if you want to make it bold, you can use font weight. Then there's font variant, which you can choose small caps or different case settings for the font. So that's another property. Now, if you want to align your text, so you'll probably want to do this for the mundane moment assignment. Text align will let you have the text be centered or to the right of that box model. Left is the default. Then you can also justify, so if you want all the text to firmly line up on both the left and right side of the box model, then you can say justify. You can also specify leading. So you have line height. So in typography, leading is the space between each line. It was designated for typesetting purposes by putting actual pieces of metal between the type on the typesetting machine, actual lead. That's why it's called leading. And for the web, you use the line height designation property for leading. So you can say line height of 10. We'll push it down 10 pixels. So that's the equivalent. There's really no leading property. There's line height though. So you can just use a number value as well to say the amount of space. So that's using line height. Text color, you just use color. You can use brackets, color picker to figure out what the text values are. Or you can just guess the color, most likely that color is available. Text decoration is something that we'll use later on. So it's what you can use if you have links and you want to remove the lines underneath the links. So you saw on Apple's website, they have a link. Typically links would have a line underneath to say that it's a link. But you can say text decoration none to get rid of those lines. There's some other text decoration values as well. You can have a line strike through it. You can actually add an underline if there's no underline there. So there's some other things you can do with text decoration. Text transformation. You can specify uppercase, lowercase, or capitalize with text transform, so you can create title case for titles, let's say, for your headers. Text indent will let you indent. Letter spacing is with letter spacing. So that's the space between the letters. And then you can change the text direction as well. So you can say direction, LTL, and that will actually flip the text. So instead of the text going from, you can say from right to left or left to right. And then you have word spacing. And then text shadow is interesting because you can actually create this underlying shadow on your text. So I'll show you that one. So finally, the font property is what you use to set all these properties. And when you see this font property being used, sometimes you'll have a font and it will, let me go back. It will have multiple properties or multiple values. So this is a form of shorthand. So this will set the font for this p tag with the class of the ex2. So italic, bold. It'll make it 12 pixels in size. It'll use Georgia as its main font, and then it will default to a serif font if Georgia's not there. So basically, in order, you can set the font style, the font variant, the font weight, font size. 30 pixels is the line height, and then you can pick a font family. Now this font face is a rule. They call these rules. So if you see the @ symbol in front of a keyword, that's a rule, and that is something that you can establish using the source link as well. So it's going to look for this font, but you're basically loading these fonts into a folder in your directory structure and then uploading them to the server. So the Google font works by pulling the font from Google, but when you use this @font face, you're supplying the font yourself. And it has an extension of .woff. So if you're familiar with fonts, you'll see open typeface fonts. You'll see older fonts were called true type fonts. These fonts have different file extensions, but the WOFF file extension is for a web-based font. And you would basically have a font on your system, and you can find tools that convert your fonts to these web-based fonts, and then you upload the web-based font to the server. So these are some places where you can find web fonts. The fonts here are different than this .woff file extension. So those are two different ways of including unique and fonts and ensuring that the font that you are putting in your design is the font that will actually appear on the web page. So you either use @font face or you use a web font. So let me show you, one of the things I want to show you is how to use this shorthand right here. So I will go into brackets. So the way the font property works, let's say I have a paragraph, and I'm going to give it a class. So p dot I'm going to call it the class trivia. Let's say I have a web page, and there's different parts of the web page that has little snippets of trivia throughout the web page. And I want all that trivia information to be in a bolder font. Let's say, it's all going to be in a serif font, and I want it set to italics, and I want to make it bold. So I want this particular part of the web page to be like a sidebar that's interesting with little tidbits of information, facts, let's say. So I'll use font property. So the way it works is, first you can declare if you want it to be italic or not. So you say italic. Next you can say bold. Next you would figure out the size. So if I want the size to be set at a certain value, I can say 12 pixels. Or you can use M, like we had earlier in that presentation. If you want it to be relative, meaning it will scale up or down. Next is your line height. So here, I'll say 24. Then here, let's say I want to have a font that is somewhat elegant to draw interest. So let's say I'm hoping that they have Garamond, but if they don't, I'm going to put a comma there, and I'm going to hopefully have it default to Georgia. And if they don't have Georgia, then I'll say Serif, and it will default to whatever Serif font they have. And last, let's say I'll give it a color. So I'll make it dark blue. And now here, let's add a couple more things. Let's give it a background color. I'll say beige. And let's give it a width of 500 pixels. And then I'll give it a height of 800 pixels. And then I'll also give it a border. So I'll give this box a nice border. So I'll use border, and I'll give it a red, solid 1 pixel border. And down here, I can add that p tag. So class equals trivia. And then inside I have, this isn't true at all, but I'm saying the lemur is the world's fastest animal. It's not true, but I gotta make some trivia up. So now all of these settings here are basically being derived from, if you go back to the presentation, it's basically taking these properties. So it's taking your font family property, your font style property, your font size property, your line height, and your weight property. Everything that appears in that shorthand notion, you have to type all that out, and it's more time consuming, and this shorthand kind of condenses everything. So it's a good option to just use that shorthand. So I'm going to save this, I'm going to look at it. So there it is right there. Actually, the lemur is the world's fastest animal. That box is pretty big, and maybe the font size should be bigger and the box should be smaller. So that's my trivia section right there. So those are the basic settings for fonts. I'll put this presentation on Canvas, so you'll have access to it. Is there any questions about that? So I recommend you trying to use a web font, and then you can use whatever font you want, and play with that web font, and give it different sizes, colors. Use a combination of web fonts to convey the message of your mundane moment. Let's see. Just want to make sure. Any questions about any of that? I also have this presentation on the background property for the image. So I'll include this as well. So for your images, you can use background image, and then you have that URL, your uniform resource locator, and then the location of the image. But you have some additional properties that you can use with background images. So the thing about a background image is if the image is tiny, let's say it's 100 pixels by 100 pixels, and you create a style that has a width of 500 pixels, the image will repeat automatically. So I'll show you what I'm referring to. So this is what I'm referring to when I say repeat automatically. I'll go ahead and open up Photoshop and I'll create an image. And I'll find find something too that I will manipulate. So I like this, let's say, frog eye. So I'm just going to copy this,
Does this make sense?
go into Photoshop, create a new document, paste it, and I'll use my crop tool to make it 100 by 100. So I'm typing the control bar on top, 100 by 100, and then make it 72 dpi. And you can change this crop size, and it's always going to be 100 by 100 as the final result. So I want this frog eye, and I'll go ahead and I'll save this in my images folder. I'll save it as a PNG. I actually do the one method where I just click on the layer, first name it, so I'll call it frog eye, and I'll actually give it an extension of PNG here. And then I'll right click, quick export as PNG, and I will save it into desktop, and I will make a new folder, and I'll call it assignment 3, and then I'll open that folder, and I'll create another folder, and I'll call that images, save my frog eye, I will go into brackets, I'll save this index file in the same folder as assignment 3, so I just need to make sure that it is with the images folder that contains the frog eye. Go to my desktop, 3. So what I could do, let's say, is for my body, so I'll use this element selector, and in the curly braces, I will say background dash image colon URL, and then in parentheses, go to images, find the frog eye, double check that it's there. Okay, it's great, it's there. It's saved. Now go into my web page. And that frog eye repeats automatically. So I have this giant background of frog eyes, 11 by 100 by 100 pixels. So by default, when you use background image URL, it's going to repeat. That's a lot of frog eyes, right? So shocking, isn't it? So you may want that, okay? That's interesting style. But most likely you don't want that. So what you would have to do is use background dash repeat, no repeat. There's a couple variations to this. There's this background position center as well. So they all are kind of interesting. Question?
So you can control the size of the eye?
You can also control the size of the eye if you want to as well.
Because supposedly I only want 4 eyes on that.
Yeah, you can control the size.
That's very mystical.
So I'll show you that. Let's go back into brackets.
Yeah. Position center.
And use background, repeat, no repeat. So that will basically get rid of the repeat. So now when I go to that web page, I only get one. It's being covered because I'm using this float up here. So if I go into this, and one of the things you can do with comments, by the way, is let's say you want to see what something looks like without one of the properties. You can comment things out. So I don't want this float here, so I'm not going to delete it. I'm just going to comment it out with the asterisk /. Same way with this one.
How do you call this language? Cabal?
The,
The language, the one where this,
what do you mean?
yes, there is a slash, dot, dot, dot.
Oh, the, for the CSS, the comment?
Mhm.
Comment is how you put a comment, is with a / and an asterisk. So this is for the style, for the cascading style sheet. A comment is going to be / asterisk. Let's see.
This one is spelled. Do you like that stuff?
Oh, okay. Oh, the other thing too, since that's being applied to the body, it's the background itself. So if I created a new, let's say a p tag up here, give it a class equal to frog eye, and then I can go up here and say dot frog eye. Now I can see it because now it's no longer part of the body itself, but it's its own tag, and it's flowing with going with the flow of the HTML. So other properties for images, you have a shorthand property that will similar to the font property. So shorthand property will set background color, image, position, size, repeat, the origin, this clip property, and this attachment property as well. So I'll kind of show it to you. That's background color. We've already done that. Background image is what we were doing with the frog eye. So background size can designate a size for your images. So for example, you can also have multiple images located and either repeat them or you don't repeat them. So in this example, there's 2 flower images and one is being repeated, one isn't. I'll show you some of these examples in a bit. You can specify where you want the image to be with position. So you say top, bottom, center, right, left. You can say I want it to repeat it in the Y direction or the X direction. So you repeat it up and down or left or right. So you have these different repeat values. Repeat X is only repeating it horizontally. Repeat Y is only repeating it vertically. One thing you can do too is you can layer images, and that's nice because you can come. This is getting a little bit more advanced, but we'll go through this in another class. If the image has transparency, such as remember how we covered images last time, so PNG files have transparency. What you can do is you can create different transparency effects and layer the transparencies. And that's kind of a nice effect once you get into animation, so you can have things moving on top of other things. It's actually, well here, I can actually show this to you. So I'm just going to copy this, because it's actually pulling, there's an image of bubbles and there's the Firefox logo. So I'm going to copy this. I'm just going to replace all of this now. Let's see if this works. So I got my bubbles here. So let's see the Firefox. Let's see. Oh. Let me change this to the top. Let's see. Well, I think actually I'll create something here. So I'm going to create. I got my frog eye. I'll create another layer on top of the frog eye, and I'll just create like a shape. And I think that's good. So I'm going to export this shape. So the shape has transparency, and you see that transparency going around that shape. So when I bring this in as a layered image, I'm going to right click, export it, save it. Make sure I don't want a space there, so I'm going to get rid of that space. Hit save. Now I'm going to go back into my HTML with brackets. So here is going to be the ellipse. So go to images, add that ellipse, and then comma, URL, parentheses, and in here, images slash, I think I called it frog eye. frogeye.png. Let's look at it. So there's that. Not seeing the. Oh, I forgot the images folder here. Images. I'm going to not use background position. So I'm going to comment it out. So that's with the /*. Save. Oh, that's super tiny. But here you go. But now you can see it. So basically, I layered the two images. I layered the ellipse on top of the frog's eye. So if you look at my Photoshop file here, that's what I have. I have this ellipse that has transparency, so I see through it. Now, if I want to play with the positioning, I'm going to go back into background position. And basically what that did now is it took the, and if you look at your browser too, the way your browser is set, is that ellipse is now positioned to the right, and the frog eye is positioned to that bottom left, it looks like. Yeah, top right, well, just left. So it's centered left, basically. So that's what you can do with positioning. So if you want to play with this shorthand more, you can add some other properties in here. So I can include, let's say, I think I can include background color. I think that actually overrides the background image. If I say repeat, it will repeat it. But anyways, you kind of get the idea. So any questions about using some of these background properties? So now I repeated the ellipses and then the frog eyes. So the last thing I want to talk about is positioning. I'll include all these presentations on Canvas. And I just want to do a quick message for my Discord group. What I want to tell our Discord group something very specific, and that is, I want to let them know that I'm broadcasting this whole conversation live right now on YouTube. So they have the Sling Studio set up over there. So we're actually, I'll show you in a second.
I was going to say.
So here we are. So, well, it's in the Discord. But here it is. See? The sound that you hear is like a slight delay, but the quality's really good. I got to figure out how to get rid of the lower part of the camera. Yeah, it is. And so it's like there's a function that would get rid of it. So I just want to talk about positioning real quick. So I have one last presentation. Do you guys see where I included some of these presentations on Canvas already? So a lot of these presentations are already available to you. But if you're not, I'll make sure that they're there. Let's see. This is something that I was going to talk about in a later class, but I want to just go through it real quick. So there's a transform property that will let you translate. When you say translate, it's moving in up or down, left or right. Skew is putting something on angle, scale, bigger, smaller, and rotate. And you have coordinates, so you can move something up, down, or you can move it in what's called z-space, forward or backwards. So some values are in pixels, percentages, and ems. Ems is the relative value that, and percentages is relative as well, meaning if I make something 100%, it's going to scale up with the window. Pixels are the absolute values. Values for rotate and skew are in degrees. And then you can use scale as a multiplier as well. So you can make something half the size, 0.5. So scale affects the size. Skew, you can say skew x, skew y. translate up and down, left, right. Rotate is as it says. So for example, if I want to rotate something, what you can do is say, this is how you actually do it. So let's say I have a box here. So I'm going to have a class. I'm just going to call it box. And I'll give it a background color of green. And I'll make, the thing about background color is that if you give something a background color and you don't have a width and a height, you're not going to see anything. So you have to give everything a width and a height if it's some sort of box or shape on the page itself. Otherwise, or image, otherwise you're not going to see it. Actually the exception is the image. If you don't have width and the height, it's just going to be the default width and height that you created that image in Photoshop. So box here, I'm going to say I'm going to make it really narrow, 50 pixels, but I'm going to make it tall. And then I'm going to use this transform. So I'm going to use transform. So the property is transform, and then how you transform it is the value. So if I want to rotate it, then I say rotate, and then inside the parentheses I say, whatever amount, and then I say DEG for degrees. So I'm going to rotate that 45 degrees. And in the body, I'm just going to add a div and have the class equal the box. Save that. Now I'm going to go and do it. Let's see. Something's not right, I think. There you go. The problem was I had a space here, so there should be no space with this value, so now I rotated that green box there. So you can combine these things. So let's say I want to rotate and I want to skew. You can combine those keywords all in one line. So that's how to rotate something. So you're changing that position by rotating. Let's see. Rotating, you can scale in multiple directions, so use transform, scale. The two numbers are going to stretch it out. And then you can do multiple things. You can, like shorthand again, do a translate and rotate. Now this is the trend. Form property here, you can also use perspective, and then there's a transition property. This is when we get into animation, so I'm not going to go too far into that. So I just wanted to show you the transform property. And then last, I want to show you some more layout and positioning properties. So with positioning, you have what's called normal flow, top to bottom. Relative is relative to the size of the browser window. Absolute is going to stay in this position and not move. And fix is going to move, stay in that position, and not even reflect the actual scrolling up and down. So the normal flow is what you normally have from top to bottom. So relative moves something in relationship to something else. Absolute will move as the user scrolls up and down the page. So for positioning, we can determine where it's going to move based on this left. There's left, right, top, and bottom, and then we create a position for it. Fix is going to use the position property and move that element in relationship to the browser window. And then last, I want to talk about float. So positioning is basically creating an absolute type of position where it's always going to be fixed there, and it's not going to change based on window size most of the time. Floating elements are where that window changes and everything flows with the window, but can still set positions in relationship to one another. So the way it works is, in this example, you have these two sections, and then you float one left, you float the other right, so then they're next to each other. And then when you're done with it, you have to clear it. So let me show you how this actually works. So I'm going to create two classes. So actually what I'll do is similar to what I'm doing here. There's a section tab, so I'm going to use the section element selector, and I'll make the background color green. And then what you say for this is you give it a value for the width. That's a percentage. And that percentage is going to determine how much space it takes up in relationship to what's floating next to it. So I'll say 80%. I'll give it a height. I'll set the height at 100 pixels. And then I will give it a this float value of left. I'm just going to copy and paste this, make it quicker. For the aside, I'll make it red. Give it a width of 20%, and float it right. So in the body, oops. All right, and then in the body, I'm going to say section So I have a section, and then I have an aside. Yeah, actually, let me get rid of. Let me comment about this because it's just too much.
Just a question.
Oh, what'd you say?
There's a question mark in front of the backslash. Is it supposed to be there?
Oh, yeah, that was a mistake. So let's see, I got my section here. That should be green with 8% float left. There you go. So this is what you get. So now I have this green box here. The height's 100 pixels. I have a red box, 100 pixels. But since I designated this as 80, it's taking up 80% of the page, and the red box is taking up 20% of the page. And then as I scale my page, each of these are going to scale in relationship to the width of the page itself. So this way I can have two things next to each other. If I added something else, I could have a third thing, for example. The key to doing that, and so they're next to each other, is using this percentage. So 80, 20 equals 100%, and it fills the full width of the page. So that's doing something side by side. Yes. So anyways, it's a lot of stuff here. I could put the presentations online, but we have the video too. So do you think the video is going to help you? If you go through and watch, watch this again, it'll help you, right? Hold on one second. So let me kind of type out the main things that you want to play with for these two assignments. Assignment 3, these two web pages. So you want to, I'm just going to go in here. So for the image dominant, for your CSS, you can play with, you have these properties, so you use the background, image property, it with the transform property, and then the value is rotate, and then you put a number in there, and then you have a value for that number, which would be degrees, so you can use transform. So these are kind of the main things you have for the image dominant website. If you use let's see. Oh, you can also use position, and then you could say absolute. And then what you would also do is declare where that position is. So you can say from the left side, and then you pick the number of pixels. And then you say from the top, and then you can say the number of pixels from the top. So you can kind of position that way as well. So those are kind of the options for the image dominant site. You don't have to use any of these, but you do really have to use background image. I'd recommend you using that at least for the style sheets. And then for the type dominant site, You can use the font property, font size. You can use font family too. Color, set the color. You can put it in a box that has a color, so you can apply background color. But if you create a box for it, you have to use width, and you have to use height. And then you can determine the font family. And then you can also use Google Web Fonts. And one thing that you can also do too, if there's type that you want to use and you can't find a font for it, you can create it in Photoshop, save it as a PNG file, and then bring the type in as an image. So you can also bring the type in as an image. So these are all the properties that you can use in your styles. So you kind of begin to control positioning using these things. And then we'll get into more detail going forth after this assignment on how we can start using our mood boards to construct wireframes. And then when we construct the wireframes, we use the techniques in building our wireframes to create the exact layout that we want. But right now, you're just kind of experimenting with these different properties for your CSS styles. Okay? Oh. Any questions about any of this? And I'll send you the presentations. But if you have any questions about anything too, you go to W3C Schools. .com, and then you can look up that style in the property that you want to look up. It's just W3 school, sorry. And in the reference here, just go to CSS. And look up that particular property. So you can look things up. You might have to do a little bit of research, and you might get stuck or confused on something. So be sure to refer to W3 Schools, and that can help you. Or you can just ask me directly, and I can help you out. Okay. So any other thoughts on this? The other thing I was going to talk about, which I kind of want to give you guys some time to work, and I'll come around and help you, is style versus content. So I did have this document set up that kind of goes through that. This browser is really slow. doing too much here with the internet. Okay, so I wanted to get into this concept called picture superiority effect. So the idea is, when you're working on this, you think about words and image together, think about the power that images have over words themselves. So the idea behind picture superiority effect is that when you just describe something verbally and you want somebody to remember something, they're only going to remember probably 10% of what you describe. But once you start designing and you think about that web page you're creating, generally people remember 65% if you provide them with visuals along with words. Or you think about the context of combining words with visuals. So people will retain more information. So this little chart here shows what this is. So let's see. It's the fine art of live broadcast. So it's this here. If the information is presented orally, only 10% is retained after 72 hours. That figure goes up if you add a picture. And there's a YouTube video on that you can watch. And then I wanted to kind of show you the idea, though, where this comes into play, but with typography, because if you experiment with typography, then in a way that typography becomes an image, and it has a big impact. So here's a couple sites where these are more type-dominant sites. Let me get some other examples. Lots of these examples are in this fresher styles for the web link.
So, I mean, this is almost kind of, this webpage here for dream7.com is almost very similar to what you might do for the image-heavy type look. And the design itself is, almost has like a amateurish quality to it. Like it's kind of off balance, but they're probably doing that on purpose. This falls underneath this category called Pixelated Punk Rock School. Here's this other type of style, Graphic Table Transformer School. Kind of, here's a screenshot. This type of style here, this was kind of an interesting style that existed probably in like the late 90s. Kind of techno-focused, but very abstract, and the colors are kind of reflective of print colors seen like hay. So that's an interesting look. Here's a good example of a type dominant web page. So more minimalistic. If I go to O'Reilly, right, O'Reilly account, there's an updated version of this book called Fresher Styles. So that book was called Fresh Styles. But there's some really interesting examples here of type dominant and image dominant sites. So sites where you just have endless links. There's this one style called corkboard scrawl. And it's kind of the Pinterest type style with the page. So the thing you got to remember about a web page is that there really isn't a fixed width or height. So it can kind of go on forever. So this site Constant is interesting. This site here, techserver.org. So this is the site, and the way the images just kind of flow throughout. It's kind of this endless landscape of imagery from top to bottom. There's some interesting things happening in GIF animation. We'll get into GIF animation as well, but this is another type of approach you can take. It's really following the flow. Here's another one. Oh, it's no longer there. So I can give you a link to this book. I kind of went through and in that document that I can post to the Canvas page, I went through and I found some interesting ones. A lot of these, though, unfortunately may not exist anymore, as you see here. So at least they're somewhat documented. What you can do, though, is you should be able to copy these links and go to Wayback Machine, and then see if they can be found there. Yeah. Anyways, just the way that these images are collaged are kind of interesting. This is an interesting style as well, this hand-drawn analog style. So this is something that Ed Fella, who was the chair of graphic design at Cal Arts, created. He does everything with a colored pencil, or he uses like a multicolored pen. Here's another look too, combining like your own illustrations as well. So that's another idea. So there's all these different ideas. So there's a lot of different things that you can play with here. So, anyways, I'm gonna stop talking, and I think that's good for now. So now that I have this on YouTube, you guys can go to the link if there's information that you need.